George, like Wolfe, is an illustrious alumnus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is also a distinguished service director of the Thomas Wolfe Society, who attends its annual conference with great regularity. It isn't light summer reading, as one of Hovis's already multitudinous commentators on Amazon notes of the skin artist. Well, the book's epigraph is from Dante's Inferno. Acclaimed fiction writer Lee Smith writes, quote, Hovis has created an old-fashioned morality tale set against some of the most garish manifestations of the Sun Belt, end quote. I personally find the opening sentence of The Skin Artist, quote, the morning Bill Becker awakes to find the butterfly bleeding on his chest, his upwardly mobile life begins its downward spiral, to be eerily reminiscent of the following one. Quote, when Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin, which I'm guessing you all recognize as the opening sentence of Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. Reading fiction is fundamentally about changing your life, and in The Skin Artist, tattoos serve as physical manifestations of the potential for that change. Hovis did confess in my English 214 class yesterday that his favorite author in high school was Edgar Allan Poe, which makes it all that much easier for me to assign him a spot on the Southern Gothic continuum, which of course makes him co-equal with such writers as Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner. You won't find Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha County on any maps, but you will find Hovis's Gaston County in North Carolina. In The Tattoo Artist, Hovis gives us a brink of the millennium new self-portrait of characters at the crossroads of rural and urban lives. Even as Lucy's mesmerizing tattoo of Adam and Eve underneath the tree, with its, quote, branches flared like a peacock's spreading fan, burning into flame, can be associated with the hours she spends in tattoo parlors and strip clubs in gleaming Charlotte. It serves as a reminder of the gardens tilled by her ancestors out in the county, from which she and so many others in her generation have fallen. I know I speak for the entire English and Philosophy department in saying that it is good to have George Hovis back with us again tonight, so that we can all celebrate the publication of his first novel. We anticipate future novels as well. As yet another Amazon commentator notes, quote, a sequel could pick up somewhere down the line. See if they were able to keep it together or drag us through some more of their shenanigans, end quote. Please welcome me, and please join me in welcoming George Hovis back to Murray State.
Hi, I'm Allen Wier. I'm the Watkins visiting writer. I've had the pleasure of reading The Skin Artist. It's an immediately engaging novel. And I've tried to come up with 3 or 4 questions with the hope that George's responses to those might create, a helpful context for his work and a kind of introduction to the selection he's going to read from. So, my trusty questions. In place of fiction, in her essay, Place in Fiction, Eudora Welty writes, and I quote, being shown how to locate, to place any account is what does most toward making us believe it. Later in that same essay, she writes, when I speak of writing from where you've put down roots, it may be said that what I urge is regional writing. Regional, I think, is a careless term as well as a condescending one, because what it does is fail to differentiate between the localized raw material of life and its outcome as art. Regional is an outsider's term. So my first question, George, you're an insider from Gaston County, west of Charlotte, the region from which you are writing about life. So tell us a little bit about your roots in the region in which you place the novel and how the novel's structure shifts back and forth from Charlotte and the surrounding rural areas, and how you use contrast between urban and rural subjects and values to develop your characters and to render the conflicts with which they struggle.
Thank you, Alan. That's a great question. And thank you for preparing these questions. Thank you, Ann, for that wonderful introduction and for hosting me and Murray. Thank you, Dale, Ray Phillips, for hosting me and Murray, and Carrie, Gerald, for coordinating this event, and everybody else for coming out tonight. It is really wonderful to go home again to Murray, Kentucky. It's great to be here. But thinking about my home back in North Carolina where I grew up, and then my experience of Charlotte, I grew up in the certified sticks, 2 miles outside the nearest town, which was a little textile mill town named Stanley, which was about 40 minutes outside of Charlotte. And even though we did not get to Charlotte very often, as a child, I was always aware of its presence there over the horizon. And then when I finished college, I was lucky enough to get a job working, oddly enough, in a packaging inks manufacturer in Charlotte. And so maybe that's where the idea of the skin artist and the ink in this novel first began germinating, was when I was working for that ink factory. But I didn't live in Charlotte. I chose to live back home in Gaston County. My parents put up a solitary mobile home in a beautiful pasture on their property, and that's where I lived, and I commuted to Charlotte to work. So I always, I guess, saw Charlotte from an outsider's perspective. And one of my nagging anxieties in publishing this novel was that people who lived in Charlotte were going to say, oh, you're an outsider, you've got this totally wrong. And I've been so very gratified that people from Charlotte, and I have friends in Charlotte, say, you nailed Charlotte, you got it. So that gives me confidence that, that an outsider's perspective, if you spend enough time in a place, can still be accurate. If you know anything about Charlotte, you know it's been a boom town for a long time, since the early 20th century. But there was a time in the early 20th century when it was not the metropolis it is today. In fact, it was smaller than towns like Winston-Salem and Greensboro in the early 20th century. But by the 1990s, when I was living there, the boom town had exploded with growth. When I was working in Charlotte, did I say live there? I didn't live there, but I worked in Charlotte. Charlotte had been jonesing for professional sports for decades, and at that time they got the Hornets, and then they got the Panthers. And I saw the kind of transformation that kind of professional sports can have on a city. Charlotte declared itself a world-class city, a global banking superpower. And if you for a moment doubted that, all you had to do was cast your gaze up at that glittering skyline, and there in the center, at 60 stories, still today, after 30 years, the tallest structure in the Carolinas, the Nations Bank Corporate Center, which was completed in 1992. And the Nations Bank Tower, I think they've changed their name now to America's Bank, but in the 90s they were Nations Bank, and that structure is a haunting presence in my novel that both tempts and frightens Bill with its promise of a larger life. Bill Becker is the protagonist, and like so many people in the 90s, in Charlotte, he's moved from the country to the city. And he lives in one of the McMansions there, sort of on the edge of Charlotte. And he is struggling with the kind of cultural dislocation. He's estranged from his family out in the sticks. His alcoholism is worsening. And as a result, he's about to lose his corporate job with an ink manufacturer. So that's one of the similarities that I have with Bill. I don't claim him in many respects, but there are some biographical details that are similar to mine. His marriage is in crisis, and one evening he discovers that his wife is involved with the attorney who lives at the end of their cul-de-sac. And then his sort of downward spiral speeds up. 2 mornings later, he wakes up in a tattoo parlor with a half-finished butterfly on his chest. And this beautiful, heavily inked woman grinning at him, assuring him everything's going to be okay. He hasn't lost more than a gallon of blood. So his wife is not impressed by the tattoo. She, shortly thereafter, kicks him out, wants a separation. Bill finds that the only time he can overcome his crushing despair at the failure of his marriage is when he is looking at this other woman that he has just met in the tattoo parlor. And then with time, he becomes involved with her. His credit cards all become maxed out, and he figures out he has to go back home. You know, home is the place where they take you in when nobody else will. So he needs a place to stay, goes back home, and also discovers that he has to navigate some fraught relationships, in particular with his younger brother, Wesley. And Wesley is sort of Bill's antithesis. Bill has turned away from his roots. Wesley has become obsessed with their roots. He's writing this oral history of their family going back a century. And he's become obsessed, maybe almost to an unhealthy extent. And also when Bill comes back home, he brings his new tattooed girlfriend with her, and Wesley falls in love with her just as hard as Bill does. And their mother, who's a very devout, upright, teetotaling person, she's not too pleased. And that's sort of where the story takes off, I suppose. You know, the sort of collision of two cultures, one rural, one urban.
Well, I think that segues into the next question. It seems to me we live in a pretty subject matter dominated culture, and the skin artist takes on some of the taboo subject matter that parents kind of warn their children about. We've got illicit sex, drugs, booze, strip clubs, and the novel subject matter is dark and carnal and risky, but somehow you don't ever let that kind of viscerally engaging material become the tail that wags the dog.
Thank you.
And I think maybe that charged image of skin is one way you achieve that. You know, the overt act of tattooing skin and of shedding skin and allowing for a second skin. So I'm curious about what triggered that imagery, and then what conscious literary choices did you make to achieve the tone that makes this possible, you know, that the subject matter doesn't overcome character and story.
Thank you. Well, when I was working in Charlotte, living out in Gaston County in the sticks, commuting, I was also commuting to Charlotte on the weekends to the bars in search of live music and a good time. And one Saturday night, I found myself in this hole in the wall called the Double Door Inn, which I later discovered was maybe the most famous music hall juke joint in Charlotte history. It was their legendary institution for almost 50 years. 2 years ago, it closed when Charlotte decided to put a throughway through there. And again, Charlotte, with all this growth and progress, one of the downsides is demolition. And Charlotte is notorious for just leveling historic structures. Double Door is one such casualty. But back in, I don't know, late 80s or early 90s, Saturday night, I was in the Double Door Inn, and lo and behold, there on stage were these 4 boys from my high school. And they had pompadour haircuts and bowling shirts, and they were cranking out this raucous rockabilly music. The Belmont Playboys. They also had tattoos. And these guys were the first people that I ever knew who had tattoos, except maybe a friend of mine's father who had served in the military. You know, I know you students maybe find it hard to believe that there was a time in America when everybody didn't have tattoos, but you know, when I was your age, no, the only people who had tattoos were criminals and veterans and Harley-Davidson aficionados. So when I saw these guys on stage with tattoos, it kind of, I don't know, it messed with me a little bit. And then the Belmont Playboys, they became the cause celeb in Charlotte. I mean, they were Charlotte's band. They were always on the radio. For me, they were sort of the soundtrack of that city in the 90s. And I became a total groupie. And every time I'd go out to see them, it seemed like one of the musicians had a new tattoo. And a lot of the dancers on the dance floor started having tattoos. And so one of the things in this novel that I try to capture is how in the 90s you have these two phenomena, this explosive economic growth on the one hand, and on the other hand, the emergence of tattoo culture into the American mainstream. They sort of collide in this book. And maybe serve as a kind of metaphor for the kind of transformative experience of so many people who moved to the city then. It's worth noting that the tattoo artist in the Skin Artist, his name is Niall, he believes and convinces both Bill and Bill's new girlfriend Lucy that he is a shaman. And with every tattoo, he is altering the course of their lives. And so the reader, along with these characters, is trying to figure out, is this guy the real deal? Is he really a shaman like he says, or is he just a con artist?
Did you ever read Bradbury's Illustrated Man?
You know, I did long ago, but I totally forgot the story, but yeah.
Because there the tattoos become alive and we get those stories.
Yeah.
You said in Ann's class that Edgar Allan Poe was your first favorite writer that you discovered as a boy. And you mentioned something to me about loving horror, but it was the noir films, you know, Frankenstein and werewolf things. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious to what degree that interest in horror had anything to do with generating some of the elements in the novel.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So when I was a boy, my daddy always took me around the countryside to all the junk dealers and auction houses. We were searching for treasures for, you know, pennies. We often found them. And at one junk dealer, I found Poe's The Gold Bug and Other Tales for 25 cents. And I took it home, and I was probably 9, I think. So I fell in love with that book, even though I could understand maybe a third of what I was reading. And but I still think, you know, I got the gist of what Poe was going for, which was to, at least in his horror stories, to build and build and build toward this climax of ecstatic horror. And I found the same thing in those old black and white horror films. My mom used to worry that they would give me nightmares, but yeah, I never found them scary. I found them beautiful. They were, you know, those films like Poe's stories were for me my first aesthetic response to art that I was aware of having. What did terrify me was the hellfire theology that I encountered as a young person. And even that didn't terrify me until I entered puberty and discovered that, try as hard as I might, I couldn't stop looking at the pictures in the women's lingerie section of the Sears and Roebuck mail order catalog. You know, for a country boy like me, that was the only place, the Sears and Roebuck catalog, where I was likely to encounter such images. But I was convinced that I was going to burn in hell, you know, and I spent, at the age of 13, 14, 15, many hours contemplating eternity and asking just how hot that fire was going to burn. So yeah, I guess all of that goes into this book. And I think the book does serve to explore desire as well as maybe punishing that desire to an extent. Ann mentioned that the epigraph comes from Dante's Inferno from Canto 5, which you humanities students out there will know, is it chronicles the eternity of those sinners damned for their carnal desire. But Dante he kind of goes easy on those sinners. He places them only in the second layer of hell. There are 9 layers, and so they're near the top, and they don't have it so bad. So he at least has some sympathy for them, and I hope that the reader will have a similar sympathy for Bill and some of the other characters in this book as they go along their dark journey.
You are a good enough ventriloquist in this novel to throw your voice into a lot of disparate characters. The novel uses a limited omniscient point of view, and it favors one character kind of disproportionately to the other two characters whose consciousness we enter. And this may be something better answered after you read. I think you're going to read from two different characters' perspective. But I'm just interested in the technical side of that. What are the effects on being able to tell the story, having all the viewpoints you need, using three different points of, third-person voices, but one of them, is predominant over the other two.
Yeah, I would like to pick that up at greater length after reading a little bit, but just in brief, I will say that, it's always dangerous, I think, for a writer to enter a perspective that maybe is distant from their own. And the two brothers, Bill and Wesley, they're close enough to my experience. They're sort of, I don't know, neither one is me, but I understand both of these characters pretty well. Lucy was more of a stretch, and it took me a longer time to feel like I got her right. And based on reader response, I kind of hoped that I did. But yeah, she was certainly a stretch.
And I suspect those voices are written not in the sequence that we read them. In other words, when you composed it, that you might be...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. I was probably all over the place, experimenting and rewriting. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's...
Okay, thank you. Well, before I read, I want to get to know my audience a little bit better. So I got a game I want you to play with me, a little audience participation. This I call Tattoo Coming Out Party. So you don't have to take off any clothes. You can if you want to, but I just need you to send me some energy. So I do this through Tattoo Magic. You just send me some energy, and I'm going to pick up, what's out there. So come on, send me some energy. And send me some energy. I know you. Okay, no, okay. Oh, okay, over here. I'm picking up something. Maybe a lot of black ink coming from over here. Over here, some red, some flames. Flames are always good. I feel a dragon circling the room back there. Okay, I lost it. But, all right, thank you for sharing. Some impressive ink out there.
Is it all right if I tell them it's the tattoos?
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to share with you three short pieces from the novel. And this first piece is in a fancy hotel in Charlotte. Bill's wife has kicked him out by now. He has developed a relationship with Lucy, and they are spending a long weekend in the Ambassador Suites Hotel, which is 8 floors, sort of concentric balconies overlooking a courtyard down below, and they have a penthouse suite on the 8th floor. And they're standing outside the room here, overlooking, looking over to the courtyard. He watched her light a cigarette. They had a smoking room. And housekeeping had already warned her about smoking out here on the mezzanine, a weird place to hang out, but she liked it. Said she felt cramped up, staying too long inside the room. What do you reckon we'd have to do to get thrown out of here? She asked. She leaned over the balcony and spat through the air, trying to reach the fountain 8 floors below. Do you want to be thrown out? He thought of the stairs the night before, when they had checked in, him with a patch of cellophane plastered to the side of his neck, covering his new blue rose tattoo. Her in a tank top and a miniskirt that showed off a body covered in ink. You ain't got any children, do you? She asked. No. Don't you ever worry? Why? That you might not be able to? She said. We could try to make a baby. He slid a hand up the back of her pajama top and felt her skin still warm from the bed. She elbowed him playfully below the belt. I hate it when men talk nonsense. I mean it. He grinned down at her, glad that she had demanded he use protection, but nevertheless intoxicated with the possibility of her womb swelling with their child. "It's been so long since I felt this way," he said. "What, fatherly?" "Yes. You didn't want to have kids with your wife? What was wrong with her?" "Maddie was great, is great, and yes, we did talk about it. Talked about it, we talked, but we were going to wait. We both, I'd rather not talk about her, actually." Since the moment he had slid his visa across the marble countertop in the hotel lobby, Bill had managed to forget about Maddie and her lawyer. But now he was visited by remorse. So what if she was in another relationship? Did that alone give him license to move on? And was that what he was doing? He'd seen them dancing. What more had he wanted to see? He let his hand slide down Lucy's back over the soft fabric of her pajama bottoms. He would not let this love be cheapened by the recollection that at its basis was an economic exchange. He would put out of his mind any memory of the fluttering bills she had collected beneath her garter, strutting across the stage while she undressed herself to Eddie Van Halen's guitar riffs. Money, he believed, had helped ruin his marriage, and it would no doubt ruin this love too, but not yet. He pulled Lucy tight and felt himself stiffen against her. "You make me feel holy." "I ain't never heard it put that way before." "I feel like I could tell you anything," he said. "Why?" she said. "Because I'm a freak?" No, he said. "You're not a freak. I'm the freak. Remember? It's my turn." She laughed and fed him a potato chip. He spat it onto the carpet and went for her fingers. She laughed again and crumpled up the empty bag and tossed it at his face. He kept chomping at her fingers, at her hair, her nose. He would gobble her up. "What you said," her face went blank. "You know, I feel like I could tell you things." "I could tell you things," he said. "I'm serious," she said. "You seem like somebody who'd be a good listener." "Yep, that's me. My mama taught me manners. I'm a very good listener." He brought his face down to hers, and she stepped back. "You want to hear something?" She shook a cigarette out of her pack and stood there with it between her lips. "About when I was a kid?" "Yes, tell me about your girlhood." He moved in close again, brought his mouth down to hers. "Feed me the words," he whispered. And she removed the unlit cigarette and opened her mouth to let him inside. After a moment's reluctance, she stroked his tongue with her tongue, so soft, to be let inside her like this, here by the railing in public, flannel soft and soft under the flannel. He backed her against the railing and pressed himself into her. Even as the housekeeper in her uniform pushed the cart of towels past them, he kept kissing her. When the woman had gone, he stepped back to look at Lucy, still holding her hands, the gurgling of the fountain, the calypso music floating up 8 floors from the courtyard, steel drums, the quality of light filtering down from on high, the smell of this woman, all elements magically balanced. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were going to tell me a story." "What?" "From your childhood." "It ain't nothing." "No, you had something to tell me. I want to hear it." She lit the cigarette she was still holding. "Maybe another time." Somebody official looking from the hotel, maybe a manager, was rounding the mezzanine in their direction, and Lucy palmed her smoke. "Come on," she said. "I'm tired of being on display." So that's Bill and Lucy, their first weekend together. Not long hereafter, Bill's third credit card is maxed out. The hotel kicks them out. And they go back to the country, and both of them who come from Gaston County sort of figure out they've got to go back home and work things out in the place that they grew up. And the next passage I'm going to read is from Lucy's visit to her mother in the trailer park. Now, what you may have discovered in the scene I just read was that Lucy, she has something she needs to tell somebody. We find out pretty soon hereafter that Lucy is a rape survivor, has been for half her life, and she is coming to the point where she has to tell that story, and she hopes that Bill might be the person to hear it. And as you can tell, at least in this scene, he is doing a really bad job of listening. So one of the elements of suspense as the novel progresses is whether or not Bill can sort of overcome his self-indulgence and self-destruction sufficient to be her ally. And one of the things he figures out is if he's going to do that, he has to overcome his obsessive desire for her in order to love her in a deeper way. But this passage is Lucy's going back home to confront a past of trauma. So this is Lucy and her mom inside her mom's trailer. "I was kind of surprised to see you today," her mama said, popping the frozen meal into the microwave. "Why's that? I said I would come, didn't I?" "Well," Mama said, "that last time you left here in such a huff." Lucy looked at the shag carpet and felt the anger buzz through her. "What do you want, Mama?" "I just want to see my little girl. Damn, you always was so touchy. Everything I say pisses you off." On the wall above the TV, Lucy saw herself evolve from an infant with chubby arms and legs to an awkward teenager sporting a mohawk and heavy mascara. Then, older, her first tattoo on her shin bone. Cursed? God, she hated that tattoo and the artist who had done it. She was still trying to talk Niall into covering it up, but Niall said that would only make it worse. Across the wall, inside the cheapest frames money could buy, there must have been 50 of them. The entire family smiled out at her. Mama and Papa Wilson, all her cousins, aunts and uncles. But it was her own face that dominated the room. Mama had always said, rich people got their money, their status. Poor people don't got nothing but each other. What bullshit. At Bill's mama's house, Lucy had seen a few family photos, one portrait of Bill, one of his brother Wesley, tastefully placed on furniture, but nothing like this fireworks display. Overcompensation. When her eye caught the studio portrait, the one with Mama's boyfriend in it, Lucy and her mohawk, frowning there between the two of them, one happy family, the only thing she could do was point. What is that? Mama puffed on her cigarette, letting her eyes play across the wall. Where? Why would you still have that picture? Her mama's jaw clenched as she stared at the wall. Lucy stood up, walked to the collage of photos, and reached high, lifted the frame from its nail. She carried it to the kitchen and opened the cupboard under the sink, tossed it into the trash. Mama settled deeper into the recliner, her eyes taking on a hard look. What? Did she blame Lucy? Did she still think her daughter had lied? Hadn't they hashed that out last summer? Lucy stepped out the back door and down a set of rickety stairs onto a concrete patio. There in the purple light of dusk, she stared at the backside of the neighbor's trailer and tried to catch her breath. I see you're still driving that new sports car. Mama stood at the top of the stairs and pointed to the white Corvette sparkling beneath the security light. "Does that surprise you?" Lucy said. The cherry on her mama's menthol glowed in the dark. "Be nice," Lucy said, "and maybe I'll take you for a ride." "Don't be a bitch. It takes one to know one." She wasn't going to let the old woman bully her. "I just think," Mama said, "you ought to save your money, or you'll end up like me, stuck living in a shithole the rest of your life. I know you've been talking about moving away from that ratty apartment in the city, and cashiers don't make enough money to drive brand new sports cars." Her mama nodded and raised her eyebrows like she knew all about Lucy's secret source of income. So that's Lucy's journey home. I'm going to read one more section from Bill's journey home, which takes him to a very different place and a different family. Bill's people are not wealthy, but they are financially secure. They own some land. And as the novel progresses, Lucy comes to crave that kind of security she sees in Bill and Wesley's family. Bill's parents are teetotalers. They are very frugal, and they're solid people, so they are disturbed by Bill's fall from grace. And Bill is keenly aware of that dissonance. And when he goes back home, he gets off to a really bad start because he's drunk, and he takes his new tattoo girlfriend with him, and his younger brother shows an interest in Lucy as well. Bill's mother informs him that his grandfather is on his last weeks, and if Bill wants to see him alive, he should not neglect to pay a visit. So this last piece is Bill and his younger brother Wesley's visit to their grandparents. And as I mentioned earlier, Wesley is obsessed with their roots, and their grandmother is serving as Wesley's guide. She helps him construct family trees, visit old graveyards, and start to put together the pieces of this family history. Okay, so this is the visit to the old folks. "Hey, Grandpa," Bill said, picking up the hand Granny had dropped. The old man smelled bad. Maybe his catheter had leaked. "Who are you?" the man said with a stubborn and confused and fearful look. Bill laughed uneasily and released the old man's hand. "This is William," Granny shouted. "You remember William?" "Who?" "Margaret's boy," Granny shouted. "You remember? Wesley's brother." The old man stared blankly at Bill a long time, while Bill struggled to find some conversation starter. Finally, it was Grandpa who broke the silence. "I'm the oldest living man person I know." "Everybody he knew is already dead and gone," Granny said. "That must be hard," Bill said, "missing your friends." "All his brothers and sisters," Granny said. "Every single cousin, gone." "I'm sorry," Bill said. "You have to talk louder," Granny said. "He complains about his hearing aid. He won't wear it. I had your mother take it to the doctor and have it worked on, and he wouldn't touch it after that. He won't let me handle anything. I tell him he ought to clean his teeth now and then. He just sets them on the side table by his bed, and the things are getting filthy. When I tried to soak them in the cleaner, he complained for a week, said I'd ruined them." "It must get hard sometimes," Bill said. "I try not to be ugly with him," she said in a lower tone. "Even when he's ugly to me, I just tell myself it's not the real Matthew talking." So this is what a marriage came to. Some reward for her decades of commitment. Bill considered how he himself had already trashed 2 marriages in less than a decade, how he was ready to pledge himself again to a woman he had known for less than a month. Granny told Wesley she had a book in the other room she wanted to show him. She struggled to rise from her chair. Bill watched his brother take her hand, help her up, and steady her while they walked to the den, the room where she kept her boxes of family records and newspaper clippings marked heritage. "I'm so glad you always take the time to visit him," Granny told Wesley as they left the room. "None of the other grandchildren come around." Left alone with his grandfather, Bill sat beside him, wide awake now. Grandpa stared vacantly toward the fireplace, and the turkey feathers spread there into fans. As a child, Bill had fantasized about taking those fans down when no one was looking and carrying them into the woods somewhere to see if he could use them to fly. "You seen any interesting programs lately on TV, Grandpa?" His grandpa nodded automatically and continued to stare at the hearth, its firebox scoured clean. No more fires to be lit on those bricks. He and Granny were far too old to manage the wood, the flames. Instead, they cranked up the electric heat till it was hot as July in here. Out the picture window, Bill could see a cooling breeze in the trees. It was even harder than Bill had often imagined, reconnecting with his roots. The heat in the room was making a slick of sweat rise, dampening his shirt. Grandpa reached for the quilt and pulled it up to his chin. Bill reached a hand to help tuck the quilt, and Grandpa shot him an angry look. Bill wished he had learned to pray. His mother had tried to teach him. Maybe prayer was the only thing that could break this paralysis. Even sweating didn't help. If he could, he would pray to their God to look down on their suffering and have mercy. He would pray for understanding, to know why bodies broke down, why they took so many years to fall apart. After what felt like a very long time, Granny came hobbling back into the room. Wesley followed her, carrying a box full of papers, notes on family history. The two of them sat together on the sofa, comparing family trees. Wesley had always possessed a patience Bill lacked. Bill did remember one discovery he had made, sifting through those old family documents. He must have been in college already, home for break, when he had stumbled upon the photocopy of what turned out to be an estate sale dated 1821. Among the ancestors' hoard, an apple press, a tinder box and tobacco, cobbler's tools, a box of nails, pigs, a pair of mules, a bay mare, there appeared 3 names. 1 wench, Sarah. 1 man, Tom. 1 boy, Ben, along with the prices, which Bill had forgotten. What had he ever been told about this scattered family? Nothing, ever. And the only person he had ever asked about it was his brother Wesley, who claimed never to have seen the ledger. Worse still, Bill knew he himself had not been as bothered as he had pretended to be by the enslavement of these 3 people, by the wealth from their labor and then their sale that had been passed down the generations. Did their suffering in any way touch him, really touch him? In fact, wasn't there at least a part of him that had been titillated by the horror, glad to see his family's innocence shattered? But it was a knowledge he couldn't unknow. And every time at the ink factory, when he met with Lamar about the production schedule, or when he went out to lunch with Stewart from the lab, or spent any time with his black friends on the factory floor, and he pretended no knowledge of that ledger of sale and of those 3 lives, he knew that his co-workers knew. Even when they said nothing, they heard it. The blood crying up from the ground. Wesley held a pile of handwritten notes stacked in his lap. Granny, sitting beside him on the sofa, kept adding pages to the stack. It was more than restlessness that made Bill want to leave Wesley here, to run out the door to his car and send a cloud of dust in his wake as he made it safely back to the hard-surfaced road and then back to Charlotte and the nearest liquor store to get good and drunk before he sank with relief down against the Naugahyde and felt the pain that was almost pleasure and saw the ink being pumped beneath his skin. Thank you.
And the mother serves a meal of fresh vegetables that they've grown on their own place. And she utters this line that it was the best taste of food she'd ever had in her mouth.
Yeah.
And it's repeated in a couple of other scenes, and she seems to genuinely long for that. And it struck me that on the one hand, that was a palpable kind of image for the kind of home she wished she had, you know. But at the same time, she might be capable of using that line to curry favor, to flatter the mother and the family and be manipulative. And I loved how you repeated it, and it sort of had that double-edged quality to make her, it characterizes her, but it adds mystery to her.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I just think that's some of that same urban-rural business we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier.
In some ways, the garden, the fruitful land,
Yeah.
is the country at its best. In the passage that I just read, that pastoral agrarian ideal is, of course, in the South, always fraught with the past of slavery. And I suppose other forms of economic inequality, as we see between the two families. But yeah, Lucy becomes more enamored of Bill and Wesley's mom than she is of either man, I'll say. And we hear in the passage I read what a fraught relationship she has with her own mom. So she's craving that kind of nurturing she sees
Mom
in
gives
their
her
mother.
a microwave meal.
That's right. That's right.
There's the juxtaposition of that.
Yeah.
Well, do you all have questions? George has agreed to take questions from the audience.
Did you pull any influence from the prodigal son story with your...
Yeah, all of those Bible stories about brothers. You've got Esau and Jacob, you've got Cain and Abel, and maybe the prodigal son story. When the prodigal son comes home and the brother stays behind as the good son, he's all pissed off about the royal treatment he's given. So it's not exactly the scenario that works out in the novel. Bill doesn't get royal treatment. He's tolerated at best at first. But yeah, there is that. Unconsciously. I didn't plan that. But. Other questions? Questions? Yes, sir.
Where does he get his conscience or morality or whatever you might call it to feel guilty about his family having slaves?
That is a really good question. I hope that it is just from deep down, some core of human decency. But it's also, I think, it's interesting, is it guilt he feels or is it shame? Because in that passage, it's his awareness of how his black co-workers, they don't know this about him, but if they did know it, how they would feel about him. And so it's that because guilt is sort of a private thing, shame is a public thing. And I think it is more shame, maybe, that he feels rather than guilt. Or some combination.